Welcome to Badger Cam RC. This is part 2 of the Dumas Ace Racing Sloop 17. And without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into it and we're going to start fitting the side pieces. Now, I'm doing these late one evening as they're going to need to be glued in for quite some time and be on nice and solid. I've already cut them out, as you can see. This is fairly easy to do. Just pin it to the side of the frame using some pegs, draw around it with a great big dirty marker, and then cut it out. Cutting it out's a little bit risky. It's a bit on tender hooks. It's quite brittle. What I've chose to do with mine is make the whole thing about 2mm bigger than it needs to be. Hopefully that will mean that when I add the top and bottom decks in, they'll fit in flush alongside it all, and perfection can be attained via sanding. So I'm going to get that glued and show you what it looks like while it's gluing, because I get the feeling a lot of pegs are going to be involved in this next step. Right then, let's get on with it. And there it is in all its peggy glory. I've used epoxy resin to attach the side panels. From here on out, I'll only be using epoxy resin to glue anything on. Even though the whole thing's going to be coated in varnish, I don't want to risk that super glue getting anywhere near the water, as it will fall apart over time. It shouldn't be an issue with the amount of varnish I'm going to put on it, but I don't want to risk it. A slight deviation from the plan here, I forgot to mention, unfortunately, the keel bulb. Now, before I put the sides on, normally it would ask you to drill 2 holes in that and put pegs in to hold it on. That doesn't really sit very well with me. I think it's a bit of a naff way of attaching it, and I'm just going to glue it straight onto the side with epoxy resin. In fact, I'm going to do that as soon as I put this camera down. So without further ado, I'm going to get on with gluing that. And that's it, a good 12 hours later. I'll give that a good while for the epoxy resin to dry. And what I've done is I've gone in with a Stanley knife, trimmed it in roughly to the shape of the sides, and then sanded it back with a Dremel to get a nice even finish. Yet again though, the mahogany sheeting is a little bit awkward to work with. As you can see, sometimes when you're trimming it, the knife will catch the grain and run and snap a piece off. It's not great. If you're doing this yourself, if you want to just, as soon as it starts to run, stop, get that Dremel on it and sand it down. It's far safer to do in the long run. Anyway, I'm quite happy with that. And what it's saying to do next is to fit the bottom hull. And there's the bottom hull pieces. I've been working away at them. They do need quite a bit of sanding. As you can see when they come out, I've not done the outsides as they're going to be trimmed down. They're a little bit rough. Most of the work with these is around the centre lines here. They're a fairly decent fit, but when you wrap it around the frames, you find it needs a bit trimming at the front and a bit trimming at the back. I found the best way to do this was slow and steady, and in between every little tiny trim, a bit of sandpaper on your work surface, nice rub along, get the whole thing perfectly flat and level, and then trial fit it again. You have to cut a notch in one side of the sheet to let the keel bulb through. It's not really much of an issue, but it is a bit finicky getting these pieces to match. But if you take your time, go slow, you can get quite a nice fit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go away and glue them to the base, ready for the next step. Now I've glued one half of the lower hull on. What I found was the best way to go about it was to simply glue it in the centre around the keel bulb, make sure it's all lined up, leak a little bit of glue in from this side and fix it down. And then once you've got that bit done, simply turn the thing over, and if we can find it, Kilroy was here, because he's got to be, he's everywhere, and leak a bit of, I'm only using super glue at the moment, I'm going to go back over it with varnish, and run a little bit of super glue in from the side as you push it down, and that seems to give it a nice even fit. So now I'm going to go repeat the process on the opposite side. As you can see, I'm leaving tons of excess. I've not trimmed this down from the original size at all. I'm just going to worry about getting that sorted afterwards. Quite some time later, that's the 2 lower parts of the hull bottom. This has been an absolute bugger. If you had a load of furniture clamps, it would be a hell of a lot easier, but without them, it's a case of moving along and just gluing an inch at a time. It's probably the hardest bit that I've had to do with this kit, mainly because I haven't got the equipment for it. It's gonna need a bit of wood filler in those gaps, and when they're all sanded over, you shouldn't be able to tell there was ever any mistake. But yeah, that was quite a bugger. Now I've got to move on to doing the top decks, and with these I've got to be super careful, as I want the deck to be left as a varnish mahogany. There's been one more step in between the two of them, and I've simply drilled the hole for the rudder tube. As you can see, there's a few gaps all over the place. Fortunately, this is going to be painted and filled, so all of that should disappear. But yeah, if you're after it for a perfect mahogany finish, I think unless you've actually done a fair few of these, you're going to struggle. So anyway, let's get those top decks on. And that's the top decks glued on. Now all I'm going to do is go around the edge of the Dremel, take off that excess, and start sanding it down. There's going to be a few gaps, but a bit of wood filler, and it'll actually even out the lines quite a nice bit. And there's no mess on that top at all, so that should come up with a good finish in the place that matters. Like I say, the bottom's going to be fillered. But yeah, not nearly as bad as the bottom. Breath of fresh air considering. I've also drilled the hole from the top side. Thought it was easier rather than cutting out a half moon, just to drill up from the bottom rather than mess around with trying to cut a perfect circle in a part where I don't know where the hole will end up. Anyway, going to get on with that. And that's some trim down. The gaps now are really starting to show on the sides, but they're going to be filled in and painted, so again, not worried about it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it away, sand the whole thing down absolutely glassy smooth. I'm going to work down through the grits until it's got a really nice clean finish on it. Put some wood filler in those gaps, and yeah, see how it's looking from there. Get it ready for sealing using varnish. I think it's going to take 4 or 5 coats. But yeah, for the next few hours, I'm going to sand all this down and then clean and air all this room, and probably get on the varnishing either later today or tomorrow when the dust's had a chance to settle. Otherwise it's all going to just stick in the paint. Anyway, I'll be back in a bit. And that's it, a good few hours of sanding later. The repetitive strain injury is really coming along now. I've gone in with a filler, filled in all the gaps and sanded it back. I've glued in the rudder post, as I want that to be sealed in with the varnish, and I've added on the mast post, as I want that to be sealed in with the varnish as well. As you can see from the rudder post, come on, focus, it's still a little bit rough, but this is only the first hit of quite some coarse grain sandpaper. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go away, hit it with a few more wax of sandpaper and work down through the grains, get it onto a nice fine grain, and then I think I'm going to finish this episode with showing it after it's been varnished. And that's before the varnish goes on. I've worked my way through all the different grits, and I've gone right the way down to a 240 grit. It's starting to get a bit of a gloss sheen without the varnish on it, so hopefully it'll be a nice smooth finish. Of course, all the filler's going to show through, but yet again, bit of gloss white on the base. You'll never know it was there. Right then, I'm going to get on with varnishing it. And a few coats of varnish later, that's what we're dealing with. Looks a hell of a lot nicer now, with a nice glossy varnish finish. There's a few runs, I don't know if they'll quite pick up in the light, so this is going to need a bit of sanding back. But I think I'm going to call that for this episode. And what I'm going to do between this one and the next is sand it back a few times and add a good couple more layers of varnish to it. And then next one we'll finish off the hull and possibly start on the rigging. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching, and until next time, have a good one.